Welcome back to Football Unspoken. Going to go straight into a trivia question here. So, Rob, in 2021, 15 European clubs signed up for a brand new competition. Can you tell me what that competition was going to be called?
So not going to be the European Super League.
Nice. You got it straight away. And that takes me, that European Super League and that whole debacle opened up a can of worms for the UEFA Champions League in the way that, the whole point was the Champions League got old and stale. We needed this new format. We needed to protect the big teams with more money, more TV revenue, etc., which led to the creation of our current Champions League format. Or at least that's the guise that we built the new Champions League format under. And what I realized was the new Champions League format might not be so much of a European Super League as it is an American league. When you look at the format of the new Champions League with its 32 teams, 24 going to a playoff, my question is the new Champions League format actually an American league disguised?
I think you made a good point. It's something I definitely haven't thought about in terms of, the big draw at the moment in most European sports codes, whether that's football, Formula One, rugby, cricket even, is they're trying to break into that American market. And I think football's already got a bit of a foothold in America, obviously being the biggest sport in the world. But I think maybe that was a side goal. Maybe a side goal of the Champions League new format was to kind of create a format that the Americans were a bit used to.
Whenever there's been these opportunities to Americanize European football, so when the European Super League became a thing, one of the probably the biggest factor that all the fans hated and started rioting against was there was no promotion, qualification, relegation from the league, which is a very American structure. So all the fans were saying, no, you can't have a league without qualifications, etc. Another example of when they've tried to Americanize or someone's come with an American idea for European football was when Todd Bowley threw out the idea of why we have a North versus South Premier League match every year and everyone lost their, you know what. So what I've realized is whenever you tell the fans or show the fans we're doing an American style of football, we're Americanizing the sport, they throw the toys up the cot. But when they were redoing the Champions League, they did it, like I said, under the guise of we're taking what the Super League wanted to do and we're doing it under the guise of the Super League. It's not Americanizing the sport. So no one really thought about it until now that we have Americanized the Champions League. Like I say, because you look at the MLS or you look at the MLB or any of those things, it's literally a group of like 32 teams. In the Champions League, they only play 8 of the matches, but even so they play each other. Nearly everyone gets through to the playoff. It's like, more than half the teams go through to a playoffs. It's not even that exciting going to the playoff, which is I'm just describing the Champions League now, but at the same time describing American sports. And then they do the whole knockouts, but we call it a knockout, they call it a playoff. It's actually the same thing. Where you get the higher you get in the group stage, the more benefit you receive. And it's kind of just dawned on me, like literally this week, that they found a way to start Americanizing European football, which might be a good thing in some avenues in terms of more revenue, because that's ultimately the end result here. Something else I looked at is that the American sports still make more TV revenue and still make more money than, say, the Premier League or the Champions League, despite having far less viewers. And so maybe you're right that there has to be this movement towards the American model to, upgrade the revenue streams for all the clubs involved.
What America is good at is kind of creating these big leagues that last ages. The NFL goes on for quite a long time, considering how few teams there actually are.
Hmm.
NBA is another one that it lasts ages. It play 300 games or something stupid. I know it's not 300, but it is into the hundreds of games a year. Same with baseball. Baseball, their final, they play each other 7 times, you know? So I think what they do very well is they create sports that have a lot of games and have a lot of opportunities to make money. And I think that's one of the big things that they're trying to do with the Champions League. They've expanded it, and by expanding it, whether it's on purpose or not, they've been forced into an Americanized kind of league. And I will say personally, the Champions League hasn't thrilled me in the league stages. I think there's a couple of interesting situations, you're seeing that like, oh, maybe PSG won't make it, oh, maybe Real Madrid won't make it. But that feels more like a headline rather than an actual story, if you get what I mean. I don't think Real Madrid were never going to qualify. I'm kind of the same with PSG. I'd be surprised if they don't at least get into the playoff. Brest has been an interesting one, so that has been interesting to be fair. But in all honesty, it really feels like the league stage is pretty uninteresting in all honesty, because you could lose 3 games and still make it through.
I think the first, say, half of the games in the group stage are worse than they were before because in the beginning, in the old format, we had 4 in the group. As soon as you played your first game and your second game, you had to win in order to get through. Where now, as you said, you can lose your first 3 games and actually still probably come top 8 and get the first. The only difference I would say is in the last 2 games of the group, you already knew previously who was going through after by 4 out of 6 games, you knew who was going through. Where now we're at the 7th match week, so we got the last 2 games to go. And there is actually a lot. I agree with you, they're headlines as opposed to storylines, but it is up for debate. Is PSG going to make it? Is Real Madrid going to make it? A couple of teams on the cusp of, are they going to be in the playoff, or are they going to go through to the last 16 or a round of 32 instantly? So I think there's some improvements, and maybe it's too early to tell how those will all play off. Like, how interesting will it really be in that knockout? I'm talking about those teams that come from 9th to 24th. How interesting is that really going to be? And the same format's obviously been applied to Europa and the conference in the second and third. The one caveat I would say is because they've expanded the Champions League conference and therefore Europa League and conference, the one downside is having more teams actually just dilutes the quality of the league. You look at, there's some teams in the Champions League this year, and there was always like a young boys or whatever roaming, but it was more a case of like one group would get a young boys, and then it'd always be Man City somehow, and we were all swearing because Man City just got young boys, Dynamo Zagreb and I know Accrington Stanley, which would be impossible, but somehow that was just always their group every year. Where now there's like 10 young boys in the group stage of the Champions League. And I feel like that also drops down into the Europa and then the conference, where I was looking at the conference the other day, and the state of some of the teams in the conference is just, I think they've probably done more damage than good to that competition by expanding it as much as they have. But I'm getting a little bit off topic here. What have you thought of the sort of end of the group stages?
Well, I think the end of the group stages could hold jeopardy, but there's no more jeopardy than there was, if you get what I mean. I think it just takes longer to get to that point. A
Hmm.
great example is when Newcastle, PSG, that group was ridiculous in the last day. All 4 teams could have got through. It was a ridiculous situation. I get what you're saying. The last 2 games, but you kind of have to wait for the last 2 games for it to happen. Whereas in all the other games, like if Barcelona lose their first game in a group of 4, there's a bit going on. You can't drop another point really. It's a bit twitchy, because the problem was that it wasn't just whether you qualify or not; it was who you were playing next. And I think that's the big thing. Like, and don't get me wrong, I'm very curious to see how it works out. But I would be absolutely like fuming if I came first in that league stage, because I think the way it works is you come first in that league stage, you go through to the next bit, but then in that initial playoff, 8th will play 24th. And for example, your 8th team at the moment, the way it could work is your 8th team could be like Lille or someone like pretty average for a Champions League, and 24th could be Real Madrid at this point, And like, imagine how done you feel if you come first, you get your break, and then Real Madrid come 24th, and then Real Madrid are your team you're playing, and you're like, that's just silly. But the other side of it, the other interesting bit, because we were talking about the Americanization of it, and the interesting thing that they keep talking about, and one of the things that I know that they spoke about for the Super League was having multiple games in America. And I think that's one thing that I really, really hope doesn't come to pass, because in all honesty, we found out in 2020 how important fans are to football. Fans make football much bigger spectacle. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that there's not very diehard fanatic fans overseas. I mean, me and you were very fanatic fans when we were in South Africa, and we would have given anything for them to have a Premier League game in South Africa. We would have gone absolutely mental for it. But for every one of us, there's 20 people who are going to go just for the spectacle of it, just for the fact that they can say that they went to a Super League game. And I think as long as Champions League don't fall down down that rabbit hole, then there's still hope for them to become a sensible competition again at the end of the day.
Well, just like you didn't want to give the chief officers the credit for Americanizing the Champions League, they kind of stumbled upon it rather than doing it by intention. My concern is for that same reason, they don't have a grasp on what's really happening in football to be able to make a good decision in the face of money and say, we're not moving Champions League matches over to America. The reason I have that concern that they might do it, or I'd even put it as likely in the next 5 to 10 years, is because the Super Leagues or sorry, not Super League, the Super Cup, it's called, for Spain and for Italy, has been moved to the Middle East. I think it's Saudi Arabia that's been moved to. So those games, AC Milan versus Inter, are just being played in arbitrary stadiums in Saudi Arabia for big money. I think each team, the prize money for the Spanish one, which was a 4-team tournament, was 30 million euros or pounds, etc. So it's big money that they're being paid to do that. So it's a no-brainer, but it does, break the whole European heritage of all of those tournaments by doing it. And ultimately, my concern is this Americanization is going to spread through the rest of European uh, football. Guys, this has been a really interesting conversation about the new Champions League format. Let us know if you think it's been built under the guise of Americanization or you disagree. We'd love to hear what you think. Until next time, this has been Football Unspoken. Cheers.